Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to tackle one of these topics that is a bit controversial and perhaps might make some people a little bit upset, but it wouldn't be a day that ends in the letter Y or a day where I see the sun rising in the east if I didn't do something like that. So here we go. Why am I not a Sedevacantist? Well, first of all, I want to make a couple things clear. I'm not anti-Sedevacantist, meaning I don't actually have any ill will or anything like that towards Sedevacantists. In fact, I don't really think about it that often. I do get a lot of emails from Sedes who try to convert me to their position. I do get a lot of people commenting in the comment sections on my videos trying to do the same thing, but this is to be expected. And I have had the odd encounter with the zealous Sede on Twitter who I'm not really sure if he's trying to convert me or to get me to never convert, but for some reason he wants to yell at me about it with caps lock, so that's another story for another day. But in any case, I also don't think that Sedevacantists of goodwill are necessarily schismatics, and I don't like using that term schismatic very often because it's thrown around at people that are SSPX supporters. Today, in today's world, people throw around the word schismatic the same way that Democrats tend to throw around the word racist, or leftists, use the word bigot. Everyone who doesn't agree with them is somehow a racist. And it's like, why do you think about race so much? You're probably a racist yourself. I find the same thing with people who use the word schismatic all the time. You're this and that, so therefore you're schismatic. And it's like, where did schism come from? I'm kind of confused right now. Why do you think about schism so much? Maybe you should think about something else, because usually people who only think about that thing are obsessed with that thing. And if that's the case, you might actually be a schismatic yourself. I find it very strange, this insistence on calling everybody they disagree with a schismatic, but these are the days. Sorry about the trucks driving by here. In any case, the reason why I say I don't think Sedevacantists of goodwill, and of goodwill is a big but of goodwill is a big if, I should say, is because, as far as I'm concerned, when I read the literature on what it means to be a schismatic, whether it's Thomas Aquinas and the great saints and whatever, it's pretty clear that to be a schismatic, you have to essentially reject the papacy out of principle. It's not just the odd moment of disobedience, because, of course, scriptures tell us that you could obey God over man. That could include any superior. St. Thomas Aquinas is very clear that St. Paul resisted Peter to his face and wouldn't go along with what he was doing because Peter was scandalizing the church. I mean, you can use your critical thinking skills and understand that if you disobey your father in one instance and you have a good reason for it, this is not you saying your father isn't your father and doesn't have the authority to do what he's supposed to do as a father. They're very separate things, and people with critical reasoning skills can probably distinguish between those two, which is rare today, sadly. But nonetheless, in order for someone to be a schismatic, they have to essentially reject the Pope in principle. They have to reject the papacy as such. They have to reject that the Pope has the authority to do Pope things. And in the case of Sedevacantists, if a Sedevacantist is of goodwill and doesn't believe that there's been a Pope for a certain amount of time, personally, I don't see that as that person rejecting this to submit to the Pope. I see that as that person believing in good faith for their reasons, which we'll get to in a second, that there is no Pope and therefore there's no one to submit to. I would imagine that Sedevacantists are actually very ultramontane. They probably exalt the papacy to a very high level, which is one of the reasons why I think they're so reluctant to believe that recent popes have been popes, is because they hold the papacy, at least in theory, in such high esteem. So I would say, in some senses, I don't think Sedevacantists are schismatics, because I don't believe they refuse to submit to the Pope, because I don't think they don't think there's a Pope to submit to, if that makes sense. That being said, there are other ways to be a schismatic. One of the ways to be a schismatic, at least by definition, and I'm not throwing this around loosely, I'm just putting that out there, but the other ways you could be a schismatic are to reject having communion with your fellow Catholics, and there are many Sedes who will reject the Catholicity or the Catholic status of other baptized Catholics out of principle, and that to me seems like a dangerous proposition, and that's another conversation for another day. But I just realized, maybe you're listening to this or watching this and you don't really know what a Sedevacantist is. Well, if you don't, a Sedevacantist, there are many strands of Sedevacantism, and we can't go through all of them, and I'm not even going to pretend to, because they disagree with each other almost as much as the various Orthodox churches tend to do, anathematizing each other and whatnot. And but basically, Sedevacantists believe there hasn't been a Pope for a certain amount of time because of the loss of office due to heresy or something like that. Some Sedes believe that Pope John the 23rd was not really a pope. There are some conspiracies about Cardinal Siri. That's a whole other conversation. Some believe Paul VI lost the office. Some believe John Paul II lost the office. There is a strand of Sedevacantism that is not uncommon in the traditional movement, at least privately held by many, about this loss of office by John Paul II, but they believe that Paul VI was the Pope and so forth. Anyway, too much to get into here. Too many details. Leave these up for a traditional Catholic theologian. I am not one of those. I'm just a dad with webcam, as my friend Taylor Marshall loves to say. I also want to be as nice to the Sedevacantists as possible, because I do think there are Sedevacantists of goodwill who I greatly respect as intellectuals. One of these gentlemen is the fellow who runs the WM Review. His pen name is S.D. Wright, and he is, in my opinion, an excellent scholar. And his website, the WM Review, isn't really about Sedevacantism per se. It's, if you can read between the lines, you can tell, but it's really actually just a collection of really excellent Catholic theology. I recommend it for everybody. Please go visit his website. It's the WM Review. If you just Google that, you'll find it. Lots of great stuff on Cardinal Newman there. Lots of great stuff on everything, really. It's a really special website, and I really appreciate it. So there are some Sedevacantists who are real strong intellectuals. And my reasons for not submitting to the Sedevacantist thesis, or one of the Sedevacantist thesis, doesn't really actually have that much to do with the intellectual side. As we'll talk about, it has more to do with the behavior of many prominent figures in the Sedevacantist movement, but not with the intellectual side. Because if I'm being honest, there are very strong arguments for Sedevacantism. And if you are an honest Catholic, theologian, traditional Catholic especially, you will have read some literature where it makes you scratch your head and you go, it's pretty strong. It's not something that you can approach with kid gloves. Now, there is really strong literature against Sedevacantism by traditional Catholics and others. So it kind of, in some ways, it's kind of like assessing, and I'm not comparing, by the way, the Sedes to the Orthodox, or the Orthodox to the Sedes. But when you do read through some very strong Orthodox literature, maybe it's against the papacy and so forth, again, it is not something you approach with kid gloves. People of goodwill have come down on other sides, and only God can judge, as they say, and it's not up for me to do. But I sort of have my main reason, I should say, for rejecting Sedevacantism, as I said, is not intellectual. It's behavioral and almost a gut reaction. And maybe people won't think that's very sophisticated. Well, I am not that sophisticated. Look at my beard. It looks like it needs a weed whacker. By the way, you can buy our beard products in the link to the description. And if you want to know more about that, you can visit our website, thekennedyreport.com, where we have all of our TKR products for sale. Now, how is that for a segue into an ad? KennedyReport.com, and visit the TKR store to see our new products. Kennedy's Choice Beard Oil. You can use this on your beard to help with alleviating itchiness, dryness, and irritation of skin. And don't worry, no animals were used in testing this product except for myself. Use Kennedy's Choice Beard Balm for a softer, healthier, manageable beard that is made with natural ingredients. And trust me, I know a thing or two about beards. Visit thekennedyreport.com and check out the TKR store. The links for this are in the description. I think it was St. Augustine that said that back in the ancient world, when they would say someone was a virtuous man, they would say he was a bearded man. I'm not saying you have to have a beard to be virtuous. I'm just saying that if you don't have one, then maybe you should consider growing one. And in fact, our beard oil, our beard balm does have a natural ingredient in there, which is used in hair stimulant supplements or hair stimulant products. So it does actually help your follicles on your face grow into a thicker beard. As I always joke, I actually did shave this morning, but our products are so effective, they work. Okay, not only are we making beards great again here, and if you're a Sede, you're a modernist, you're a traditional Catholic, or you're not Catholic at all, we could all do with a little more beard. So check out the links in the description. In any case, the arguments for Sedevacantism in some ways are very intellectually satisfying. And I'm trying to be as nice as possible here because I'm not trying to do this anti-Sede thing. I'm just trying to express my reasoning. It would be really nice from a satisfying intellectual perspective to not have to do apologetics for Pope Francis. It would be really nice if we looked at the Assisi meeting in 1986 with John Paul II and we didn't have to say that was the real Pope, because that was an abomination. It would be nice to look at some of the things said by Pope Paul VI, of course, some of the things done. It would be nice to say that this decline in the church since the 1960s was really because of anti-popes. And it wasn't because of the true papacy. That would be, in many ways, and I'm not downplaying this, I'm not trying to say this is an easy solution because it's intellectually simple. What I'm trying to say is, objectively speaking, if we could say that, then that would make a lot of things a lot easier from an intellectual perspective. I also don't believe that Sedevacantism necessarily leads to despair, as some do. I can see how in some strands it could, and admittedly, if you look into some strands of Sedevacantism, it does get kind of weird in some ways. But there is evidence, and again, our friend at the WM Review, again, who I recommend, his scholarship is very good on many things Catholic, and it's not really a Sede website, but he is a Sede himself. He does show on there that in the past there was speculation or examples of how you could elect a pope without having cardinals. Of course, there were not cardinals at the early periods of the church, and essentially it was bishops who were of the local bishops who essentially would elect the Bishop of Rome, and the Bishop of Rome was seen as the pope. I mean, in some ways, it is kind of that simple. So in that theory, if Sedes did believe that there were still valid bishops, which some of them do, then in that case, there could be an election of a pope, I think, if I'm following the logic. So I wouldn't say Sedevacantism necessarily leads to despair. I'm not going to caricaturize it like that, although in some strands, perhaps it does. And as I said, it is intellectually kind of satisfying. In some ways, it makes a lot of sense. But as I've released my book, which you can see here, my point, there you go, right there. As I can see here, you can see here on the screen, my book, SSPX, The Defense. I knew that I would be getting criticisms from the neocon pope-splainers of the world. I expected that. That's like obvious. But one of the things that's been fascinating to see has been the amount of time that various Sedevacantist outlets, and I'm not going to name them because there's no point, but some of the various Sedevacantist outlets have spent in criticizing the book. And I do find it fascinating. And I'm going to be honest, it's sort of soured me on the sort of Sedevacantist world per se. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not willing to submit to the Sedevacantist position. I wasn't planning on it. I didn't think about it, and I wasn't hoping to. I'm just saying this is one of the objections that I have. And before I continue, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, you're just annoyed that some Sedes are annoyed about your book. Or no, I'm not annoyed about that. I knew things like that would happen. I'm just saying it's been a fascinating look into what I think is a major problem in Sedevacantism, which I'll explain as we continue here. It's been very strange to watch the Novus Ordo types, the Pope-splaining types, who will tell you that you can't, tell the difference between a statue of the Virgin Mary and a Pachamama, or you're silly if you think there's a difference between what happened with Pachamama and the Virgin Mary, those types, who hate the SSPX with all fibers of their being in a very strange way, almost in a pathological way. It's kind of strange, the obsession they have. On the other hand, I've started to notice extremely similar critiques from a lot of the Sedevacantist talking heads. And I've started to ask myself why that is. Because it's sort of a litmus test for me. When someone is vehemently against Archbishop Lefebvre and against the Society of St. Pius X and spends a lot of time going after traditional Catholics that support the SSPX, I find that very telling that, in my opinion, someone is just really off about Catholicism. Now, don't confuse my meaning. I'm not saying that if you are not someone who knows a lot about the SSPX, you're not a good Catholic. I'm not saying anything of the sort. I'm just saying, for me, in this time that we're in 2023, living through this crisis in the church, it just seems like one of the dumbest things to do for people to spend time going after the SSPX. Because listen, if you thought there was an issue with the society in some way, if there was a list of 1,000 issues, the SSPX would be like number 1,000. Not to harp on the Pachamama thing too much, but I don't think we harp on it enough. We had an act of idolatry, objectively speaking, overseen by the Pope in the Vatican. This is the kind of stuff that if you heard about it in the Old Testament, you'd expect the participants involved to be swallowed up by the earth and cast into a pit of fire. We have, drag queen nuns doing things in baseball stadiums. And sure, the bishops put out the odd little Instagram video or Twitter post about how they're disappointed or whatever. I'm sorry, that's not going to cut it. The only reason we're at this point is because the bishops have failed for a long time. This would never have happened back in the day because the bishops would have led a boycott, a national boycott, and they would have lost their business. But they don't do that anymore because they're largely feckless and largely effete in their ministry and don't really have any masculine force behind what they do. There are exceptions, and I applaud those, but largely speaking, it's a big problem. Look what the bishops did during COVID. Vaccines essential, sacraments non-essential, basically. It's amazing. Bishops around North America, around the world, they can't stop sacrilege from happening on a daily basis in their parishes. In many cases, they participate in themselves. They can't stop it. They don't have the time or the energy, it seems. But then when the government says you're going to catch a cold and die, somehow they can mobilize their diocese as if they're mobilizing on the Eastern and Western front simultaneously with the Schlieffen Plan, and somehow make sure that every parish completely transforms itself in a way where there's new seating plans and stickers on the floor and implements and hand sanitizer and new signs and instructional videos. I mean, it's like, wow, they can really do something if they care, but they just don't care about almost anything to do with the faith, it seems, these days. And it's despicable. It really is sad. All these things are happening. So when I see people spending their energy going after the Society of St. Pius X, to be honest, I just have to give my head a shake. And I realize, of all the things, if somebody is going to spend their energy going after the SSPX and Archbishop Lefebvre in 2023, with everything that has transpired and all that is going on, it's very hard for me to believe that those involved really do care about souls. I'm being honest. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing, and again, there are many good Sedevacantists and people of goodwill, and I'm not anathematizing the group or anything like that. But this behavior that I've found on behalf of Mene Sedes is, to me, evidence that, at least for many of them, it seems to me that it's more an ideological position than a religious position or a position where they're seeking holiness. Another thing that bugs me about the Sede movement is that, listen, at a certain point, whether we're looking at canon law or church history or whatever, we do need to put down our textbooks, put down our Wikipedia, put down our whatever for a moment, and realize that we are Catholics, and if we are attending valid sacraments, and we are living in a state of grace, then we can ask for the Holy Ghost to guide us in our lives. And if that's the case, we should see some fruits of that sort of thing. And the fact that so many Sedes spend their time really going after a lot of other traditional Catholics, to me, I just don't see good fruits. Maybe that's not a very sophisticated argument, but I just don't see it. I don't understand why a minority of Catholics, who are largely speaking sort of persecuted by their fellow Catholics, which is not fair in many cases, would spend so much time acting like malcontents and going after other Catholics who are just trying to also help the church find a way through the crisis. It just seems, in my opinion, very disingenuous and very wrong-headed to me. And I just can't see that thing being of God's favor. I don't know how else to explain it. Now, of course, there are going to be some people that are going to be very upset by this, and I'm not making a statement about any particular Sede. Some Sede resources are very good, as I said, and I would recommend them for theological reasons about lots of topics. Father Chiqueta's book, Work of Human Hands, I think it's called. I can't remember the title exactly. It's been a while since I looked at it, but nonetheless, it's an amazing book about the new Mass. It's probably the magnum opus on the deficiencies of the new Mass, so bravo. And he was a Sede. But as I've released this book, my book on Marcel Lefebvre, which you can find in the description to this video, and seeing the energy spent by both sort of the leftists in the conservative Catholic movement and the Sedes in the sort of fringe traditional Catholic movement, I realized they're basically in so many ways two sides of the same coin, and I just don't really want any part of it. Anyway, as always, let me know what you think in the comments. This has been the Kennedy Report, and until next time, God bless.